leader for the community physio and OT service at Sheffield Children's NHS Foundation Trust. And it's a real pleasure and an absolute privilege to be able to share our journey really and our story of how we've developed a sensory service in Sheffield, working collaboratively with all of our partners, including children, young people and families. So the aims of my, it's a presentation rather than a workshop today, but I would like to be able to take questions at the end. And the aims of this are to explain the history of our sensory service and how it looks today and how we got here, and then give you some data, really, the impact of the service and where we'd like to take it, and then answer questions. And one of the reasons I'm here today is that I get lots of requests from other service leads across the country to use our resources that we've developed and then to have conversations about how we managed to get a service commissioned. And it felt like such a great opportunity to be able to share this at this conference, because I'm absolutely passionate about sharing good practice, sharing resources, not reinventing the wheel, purely because if we do that, we use resources more responsibly and we benefit a much broader and bigger number of children with SEN. So it's great to have you here, and thank you so much for your time. So really briefly, our service today looks a bit like a website, which there's a screenshot from, which contains loads and loads of online resources developed by our brilliant multidisciplinary team to support children and young people and their families and anybody else who wants to access that website from anywhere in the world completely for free. When families access the website, they then have an opportunity to self-refer into the service for more support from the team. And that plugs them into a pathway, which I'll go into in more detail. Alongside this, we also have an educational resource which is hosted on a website called Learn Sheffield. It's also completely freely available to anybody anywhere in the world, which we really we made a real effort to make sure that happened. There was no password protection, for example, because once you've created a resource, you just want it to be used as much as possible. But it wasn't always like this. It works really well now, but if we turn the clock back maybe 8 to 10 years ago, we were probably in a position that lots of services are in still at the moment. We were only delivering parent sensory workshops, and they were delivered by our developmental coordination disorders team within the community physio and OT service. We did a 90-minute theory session for parents, and then they came back a week later and we did the practical stuff, and we got all our tools and equipment out and we answered their questions and did as much as we possibly could in 90 minutes with a group of parents. And the feedback was really good from parents, but we got oversubscribed really quickly. We got loads and loads of referrals and we just couldn't put on enough workshops to keep on top of it. So we ended up with a big waiting list. And on top of that, we were still getting lots of requests from parents, from schools, from our referrers asking for individual assessments of children's sensory needs. And we couldn't do it. We weren't commissioned to do it. We didn't have the resources to do it. And consequently, and understandably, lots of parents then went down an independent sensory assessment route. And that led to lots of substantial sensory reports, which then led to families ending up in tribunals with the local authority to make sure that was included in their EHCP. And when it was, that would then come back to my door and I would be asked, could we supply this intervention? And I was having to say no. So we really knew this wasn't working. It wasn't working at any level from the experience of the child, young person and their family, right through to commissioning and use of money, really. So we had to do something different. And we wanted to know what was helpful from the people who use our service right from the go, really. So we did some really good evaluation of the feedback that we always gathered at our parent workshops to find out what was the most useful part of what we were doing, because we knew it was helpful. And what else did parents need, and what were their priorities? And we gathered all that information and tried to use that to help shape the service that we have now. One of the things that came out of that was that because we were delivering our workshops just to parents, lots of parents told us they really wanted their child's teachers to understand their child's sensory needs as well, because lots of the problems were presenting in school as much as at home. And we were already delivering some ad hoc teacher training sessions around sensory needs, but there are a lot of schools in Sheffield, and it was very much ad hoc. And we went where there was a request and delivered it face to face. But we obviously couldn't do this in every single school in Sheffield. But where we did, it evaluated really well. And where we didn't, some schools then brought in their own independent sensory assessments. And it was at one of these sessions where I was teaching people about children's sensory needs that a Senko, who was a citywide Senko, approached me and said, would I like to come and work with a locality of schools in Sheffield? And being the way I am, I just said yes straight away. Jumped at the chance without really considering how much of my time this was going to take up. So we ended up in something that we called the Locality C project, and Locality C is an area of schools in Sheffield, about 20 schools, in an area of real social deprivation. And we began a project that took us a good year or so, that was a joint project between ourselves in health, a group of schools in Sheffield, and we really tried to work hard with our parent carer forum at the same time. So it was a real collaborative project. And the locality of schools had got some funding through the Laurel Trust. So when we were listening earlier about, funding collaborative work, I would wholeheartedly agree with that. It paid for a little bit of my time. It definitely didn't cover it all. But I could see the real benefits of that and was really invested in it. And as part of the project, we spent a lot of time consulting with the Sheffield Parent Care Forum through focus groups and backwards and forwards conversations with them. And to cut a long story short, at this point, it resulted in what we would call our sensory toolkit for education. So that was a whole raft of training resources and opportunities for the schools in Locality C. So we went to every single school and delivered a twilight around sensory needs. And we produced a training toolkit for Senkos, which went into much more depth around how they could support children and young people in their schools. And we provided them with all the resources on a USB stick at a day's worth of training. The evaluation of that was great, and we gathered all that feedback and used it to help inform the service going forward. And what was really great was that part of the evaluation was asking children and young people about their sensory needs in school, what was most important to them, what needed to change, what they found challenging, what helped them. And that really informed us as we went forward. While we were doing all of that, we were really conscious that if we were going to develop our sensory service, we needed to be doing what was evidence-based and the right thing to use public money wisely. So we did a really good evaluation of the evidence at the time. And there were some really influential papers that were coming out at that time, such as the Novak and Honan paper from 2019, which used a traffic light approach towards therapeutic interventions. There were also some briefing papers that came out from the Royal College of OT, which guided us in terms of what should we be doing for children and young people with sensory needs. And the upshot of that really was that the evidence was saying that we should be involving parents and schools and teachers. We should be educating about sensory needs, and we should be trying to use a top-down approach in the context in which that child and their family exists. We should try to change things like the environment and the processes and the people that support that child. But what we probably shouldn't do is try to spend a lot a lot of time changing that child's basic neurology, because they will probably always have sensory differences, and it's about how we adapt the things around them and the understanding of that that makes the biggest difference. So we pulled all of those things together, all the feedback, what we'd learned from the Locality C project, the evidence, the parent carer feedback, and what the children and young people were telling us. And we realised we needed a model to hang this new service on if we were going to do that. And so, having spent a year working with education, it became very clear that we needed to match their language and their way of working in this kind of tiered approach, or graduated approach to intervention. So we used that universal, targeted and specialist model. And then we created a pathway that aligned with that and used the same language, so that we were all on the same page, really. The next step was to kind of estimate how many people did we need in a team to do all this new work that we hoped to deliver. And some of that was dependent on who was there in the team at the time with a bit of extra resource to be able to join the team, and who was passionate about it and who wanted to do it. There was also a bit of number crunching, but because we'd not delivered this before, we didn't know exactly what we would need. It was really important to us that this was a multidisciplinary team, rather than it just sitting in occupational therapy, where it historically has always been. It's the OT has been the person that's seen to be the most knowledgeable and responsible for addressing children's sensory needs. And we didn't really believe that was true. So we made sure that our team included speech and language therapy, because so many of the children we see have communication difficulties. Psychology, so one of our clinical psychologists joined the team. We knew lots of children were experiencing mental health difficulties alongside sensory needs. So we managed to employ an OT who's based in CAMS, and she joined the team for half a day a week. And then we also built in some therapy assistant support, so that we could do some real practical support on the ground in schools with the children and young people. And so that led to writing a business case, which I hadn't really done before and needed lots of help and support with. And it took a long time, but I had great support around me to do that. And to cut another long story short, it got agreed by our commissioners. And so we were all ready to recruit our team and get going and deliver all this new service that we'd thought would look all singing and dancing and work really well, by going out across the city and training everybody up and starting to see children. And then COVID struck. So this was just as we went into lockdown, really, in March 2020. And we had to stop. And to a certain extent, that was a real gift to us, because actually we'd thought we were going to go and deliver the Locality C model, which was to drive around Sheffield and go and teach everybody in education all about sensory processing in face-to-face sessions. And looking back, I don't know why we thought that was a good idea and how we were ever going to achieve it. And because the next sort of few months were all about developing online resources across our entire service, we started to think much more about that way of delivering our sensory service. And we spent the next few months building our sensory webpage, which formed our universal provision. And it took a lot of time and effort and being brave and getting behind the camera and just making loads of videos and resources for children and young people. But it was a great resource, and it's now been shared all over the world, which has been wonderful. So the new sort of universal provision looked like a web page on our Children's Hospital website, which you can access at the link on the slide. But alongside that, we built our educational resource on the Learn Sheffield website, so that schools and our partners in the city could access similar resources, but tailored to educational staff on the platform that they commonly use to access all of their training. So that took us a good sort of 6 months or so to get all of that up and running. But we were really aware that that was just the beginning of a sensory service. And actually, we wanted to be able to see our children and young people and talk to their families and meet their needs much more appropriately through our targeted and our specialist pathways. So we made sure that on the website, when families had accessed that and scrolled down through the resources, there was then a way for them to refer themselves into our sensory service if they felt they needed more help, because the resources on the website had maybe ticked a few boxes, but they still needed some support from the team. So the referrals arrive to us via email now from the family, and they are triaged onto either the targeted or the specialist pathway at our multidisciplinary team meeting. And having that opportunity to bring those referrals and discuss them with a group of professionals who are not just occupational therapists makes the world of difference, because they will think much more broadly about a child's needs, and whether what we're hearing is about a communication need or a mental health need, for example. So it's a really great way to triage the referrals. We then use our therapy assistant time for her to ring the families while they're on the waiting list, to reassure them that they're in the right place and to let them tell their story, which makes a huge difference to lots of families. Many of them have never been heard, and have not felt that what they're saying is listened to. So it's a great opportunity for them to feel listened to and for us to hear their voice. And our assistant will signpost them to resources if she thinks appropriate, and she'll do any additional triaging if she thinks they're on the wrong pathway at that point. So when they are triaged onto the targeted pathway, this is what they receive in terms of intervention. A clinician from the team, and we often decide who is the best placed person to do that, depending on the information in the referral. And sometimes that's an OT, sometimes it's a speech and language therapist, sometimes it's the psychologist who already knows about their autism pathway, for example. So they will get in touch via phone or email, and often a lot of the intervention with those families, and it's normally with the parent, is about reassuring them that they are doing lots of good things that are helping, giving them more basic advice, perhaps signposting them to another team that might help, such as MAST or the sleep charity, for example. They'll make suggestions around things to try at home, and often just referring back to lots of the resources on the website, but they might make some personalised resources for that child or young person to really support that being embedded at home. We will offer a face-to-face parent workshop if the family says that's what they really need, because we recognise that not all families are as happy using online resources as others. If there are issues at school, we'll contact the school Senko, excuse me, and have a conversation with them about that child's sensory needs. And then we'll direct them to our online training on the Learn Sheffield website. And just having that resource in place and being able to direct schools to that makes a huge difference to the school, to the child and young person, and to our workload, really. So that's been such a great part of the service as we've developed it. We move children to the specialist pathway when we deem that they're at risk. And for us, we decided that that criteria should be that those children that are on a reduced school timetable or spending a significant amount of time away from the classroom, at risk of exclusion, not attending school at all because their sensory issues are such a significant factor, or there's another relevant safeguarding issue going on. And so for those children who are on our specialist pathway, they will be contacted by the therapist, and we'll start our information gathering process. And that starts with a range of questionnaires that go to parents and to school and to the child and young person. We're starting to use sensory talking mats, which enables us to hear the voice of the child and young person, no matter what level their ability to communicate, really. And then they may well need a face-to-face observation or assessment of their sensory needs. We'll create a personalised plan for that child and young person. And they may need some therapy assistant intervention to really embed that at home or at school. We'll definitely consult with school and help school to access any training and resources they might need and help them understand that child and young person's needs and how they can embed the plan at school. And where needed, if that child or young person has an EHCP, we'll input into the EHCP in relation to their sensory needs. So in terms of how that's going and the impact that we're having, it's been really amazing how many people are accessing the universal provision, really, the website. So these graphs are a snapshot really of a period of time after we went live in July 21. But we receive about 2,000 to 3,000 website hits a month on the Sheffield Children's Sensory webpage. And when people land on the website, they don't disappear very quickly. We're finding that they're spending 200 to 300 minutes on the page at a time, which reassures us really that what's on there is being used in its entirety, hopefully. When we look at the breakdown of what do people actually look at, because there are a whole range of resources on there, as you can see on, if you zoom in on the graph, you'll be able to see that all of our resources are listed there. We see that lots of people spend a lot of time on the theory and introduction, which is about an hour of understanding sensory needs. The next most popular one is regulating sensory or regulating strategies really for children with sensory needs. And then all of the other resources are being used to a greater or lesser extent. So since July 21, we've had 50,000 plus hits on the website. It's actually our fourth most popular page on the Sheffield Children's Hospital website, and I think it's the most popular after How Do I Get to the Hospital? So we're really proud of that in terms of its use as a resource. And as I said right at the beginning, I get lots of requests from therapy leads around the country asking if they can use our resources and link to the resource on their own web pages. And when they email or contact me about that, I always say yes, because it's NHS. We're a shared NHS, and we really want to use those resources as widely as we can. But I also have been saying, let's have a Teams call and talk about what else we can support you with, because it's really important that we share good practice wherever we can. In terms of self-referrals onto the pathways, the targeted and specialist pathways, I think there's always a fear that when you make a service a self-referral service, you'll be absolutely inundated. And we just decided to go for it. And one of the reasons for that was because our parent carer forum was so clear to us that when we put barriers in the way, such as making families go through a referral process like the GP, it makes it so much more complicated for them. So we decided to make it an open referral process for parents, and actually it works really well. When I wrote this slide, we were getting about 4 referrals a month. I think we're probably getting nearer 5 now, but we're not inundated, which tells us, we think, that the universal resources that we have on the website are probably ticking a lot of boxes for a lot of families. About half of the referrals end up on the specialist pathway, and the other half on the targeted. So, there are lots of children being referred who are really at risk, and we're really glad to be able to help them. We get lots of requests on both the targeted and the specialist pathway for reports to contribute to EHC plans. And at the moment, we only accept that request when they're on a specialist pathway, because that's the point when we're seeing the child and doing our information gathering and really looking at them in more detail. But the feedback from parents has been great. One parent said, I recently received the HCP sensory form you completed and just want to say thank you so much for all the work you've put in for B. Understanding the sensory side of B's challenges, the need for regulation and how to help him has been so valuable. And it's so encouraging to see how the changes to his environment have such a positive effect on him. And we're seeing lots of feedback like that, which is really, it makes all the hard work worthwhile. So I was thinking about why this is working so well at the moment, and particularly in relation to this being a conference about voice and collaboration. I think one of the really key reasons why it works is because this was a commissioned service. We were just trying to pull from other resources until that point, and we couldn't deliver what we really needed to do. But what works really well is that we have ongoing discussion and monitoring between myself and our commissioners and our DCO. And it means that we're constantly getting feedback in both directions and tweaking and changing things as we go along to meet the needs of our service users. We really tried to involve our service users from the beginning, and we did a great focus group session where we spent a lot of time listening to parents from our parent carer forum. We did a survey of children and young people as part of the Locality C project, but also a secondary school where we just asked children and young people about how they wanted to be supported with sensory needs. We've had lots and lots of input from our partners in education and talked to our parents, and that all informed the way we developed the service. We were really, really keen to make sure that the service that we were delivering was evidence-based, because we want to be accountable and use public money responsibly to do what works. So having that evidence base early on was really crucial, and it does seem to be working in terms of what we deliver. Making our website freely available was really, really important to us as a service, and I think it's just made life easier for everybody. The multidisciplinary team approach is key, I think, when you deliver a sensory service, because so many children that get referred to the service have more than just sensory needs. Rarely do they exist in isolation. And so being able to think more broadly and widely and holistically about that child's needs means that we often end up on the right path rather than just sticking on a sensory one, when sometimes it isn't really about their sensory needs. It's something much more complex or different. And because the therapists who work in the team also work in different services within the Child Development Centre and the Trust, we have really easy access to link them into overlapping pathways to meet their needs. So, you know, we think it makes a difference, but we have asked lots of different people whether it's actually making a difference. And the parents and carers are telling us that it does, and we get feedback. At discharge now, our therapy assistant rings families to hear the voice of the parent and carer and make sure that their needs have been met. And most of the feedback we're receiving is really positive. It's really important that our clinicians are happy in the team and feel that what they're doing is the right thing, and they feel satisfied with the service that we deliver. And Ruth, one of our OTs, says, it's been a privilege to be part of this lovely team of clinicians, getting to know each other through our shared excitement for all things sensory. It feels like a really supportive environment where we can share knowledge, ask advice and signpost each other, with the goal of making things better for young people in Sheffield who have sensory differences. What I enjoy most? Having dedicated time where I can listen to parents, hear their stories and support them to put in place the sensory strategies that make a difference for their young person. And I think having a dedicated service has meant that therapists really feel that they do have that dedicated time to really listen and hear the voice of children, young people and their parents. Our commissioners seem to be happy with what we're doing, and Hattie, who is a commissioner I talk to on a really regular basis and have a great relationship with, says that the development of the Sensory Service has shown how services can think outside the box to meet the needs of children, young people and their families. The service has been developed using service user and family feedback and has been brilliant at being flexible in its approach to supporting need. The service empowers individuals involved in the child and young person's day-to-day lives to support in the child or young person's care. And finally, feedback from our DCO, Michelle Racy, who's on the call. And she may have wanted to read this herself, but just to save time, she said that Making Sense is an innovative service who have supported us in making key changes in the development of support for children where they have sensory challenge or need. By moving families towards this service, we've managed to reduce the costly commissions into independent provider assessments and have enabled local support to be delivered in a consistent and collaborative way. This means that children obtain good outcomes and everyone is singing from the same hymn sheet to enable long-term supportive structures to become embedded in the functional support of children. The service enables compassionate change to be made right from the home environment into schools and leisure and back home again. Slowly, we are changing the culture of sensory importance across the city. So the feedback's great, but we know we're not a finished product, and I know there will always be things to change and improve and develop, and we're by no means there yet. So we want to increase our capacity as the demand grows, and we're already seeing that demand grow and already developing weights for children to be seen. And we know that if we can keep our weights really low, we can prevent families feeling the need to go to an independent provider, and we know the benefits of that. We want to improve our pre and post intervention outcomes, and that's why we're looking at the use of talking mats as a way to make sure we really hear the voice of the child and young person. And we're working on ways to measure our goals more effectively so that we can share those with our partners. We want to develop more bespoke resources for some specific groups that we don't feel we're addressing completely at the moment. So our early years children and those in special school, because much of the resource that we've already developed is very mainstream. And there's still this query around how do we resolve those requests for EHCP reports where a child doesn't meet our specialist pathway referral criteria, and we're thinking about that at the moment. So finally, I just want to dedicate this presentation to Laura McQuillan, who is a wonderful and amazing occupational therapist. And Laura was instrumental in developing the Sensory Service and its rollout, and was hugely passionate about making sure that the voice of the child and young person was heard and listened to and embedded into our service. Laura can't be with me today because she is battling stage 4 bowel cancer, but if she could be here, I know she would have done a brilliant presentation. So this is dedicated to her. And I'd really love to take any questions.
Hello, Jenny. Can you hear me all right?
Hi,
You
yeah.
can't see me. I switched my camera off thoroughly on my laptop, not to fall foul of the camera. Here I am. Can you see me now?
Hi, Helen. Yes.
Hiya. I'm up in slightly sunny Preston in Lancashire. So I work in the Lancashire South Cumbria area, and this is a real issue for us. We are, I put in the chat, but we are probably 8 years plus behind where it's all the things you were describing are exactly what we're experiencing as a system. And we do have some people kind of looking at what we can do about it and putting business cases together and things. But I was really just wanted to say I'm blown away and how fantastic, what a fantastic piece of work you've done to address those gaps, and how amazing that and I appreciate that nervousness about, oh, we'll do a self-referral, and you're like, oh god, what will happen? But actually to get it just shows, doesn't it, that the website is actually meeting a huge amount of need. So that's really encouraging. And my question is, did you? I know you at one point just before the pandemic, you'd identified an MDT. Did you stick with that MDT? Is that where you're at now, and this is where you're wanting to expand?
Yeah, absolutely. So our team consists of speech and language therapist, clinical psychologist, CAMS OT, OTs that came from our physio and OT service at the Child Development Centre, and a little bit of physio. So they don't have lots of time. Most of them only have half a day a week, but the OT sort of part of it makes up a full day as well. But because those clinicians work in their own teams, and they come and do a little bit of work in the sensory service, it works really well because they're already plugged into other pathways that we know children with sensory needs, mostly children with autism, often need help in, so it works really well that way.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm sure I had another question. I think it's good. I'm going to look up the talking mats separately. I'm an OT background. Oh, I know what it was. It was what level of qualification do the team have in terms of sensory? Because we've been having a little bit of this debate across the system as to, I guess it is maybe you're targeted and specialist, you need someone with a certain level, and kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So some of the team have done quite lengthy courses around, is it sensory, is it behaviour? But none of us are what would be classed as SI trained. I know that comes up a lot in independent reports, and the need for an SI practitioner to be able to meet the needs of a child or young person. We quite deliberately haven't gone down that route. So we all have lots of experience in working with children with sensory needs, and we've done training around addressing those needs in a very functional, top-down problem-solving sort of way. But where some of us have done, some of the foundation modules in SI, but none of us are sensory integration practitioners.
Right, that's really interesting.
And we don't use an SI approach. And the evidence tells us that that's not necessarily the right approach for children with autism. And the approach we do use works really well. So we feel quite comfortable and confident with that. And if you read the guidance from the Royal College OT and some of the evidence, it does show that working in that way is seen to be the right way to go.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Thank you very much.
No problem. Jamie, I don't know if you're monitoring the chat or want to direct me to people.
I am. There is one more question. We are at times up. We've got 10 minutes until the next session, but if you do want to do one quick question by Jill Tyler, she's had her hand up for quite a while, and then I can email you the rest of the questions.
It's only ever so quick, Jenny. I'm just interested. Understand that you're still coming to terms with what you're doing about those that don't meet your criteria and are going through an EHCP assessment. Have your tribunals reduced? We get a lot of, where I am, need for a sensory OT assessment to go against a private report, or parents are saying that we haven't done a full assessment because we haven't done a sensory OT assessment. And though I absolutely think your way is the right way to go, and having all those resources, universal targeted specialists, I'm just wondering, whilst we kind of change ourselves and put it in, how you manage that top end where we are getting so much challenge.
Do you know what? I'm going to defer to Michelle, who is our DCO, and will be able to tell you whether we've had less tribunals or not, but I don't think we've had as many. Go on, Michelle. You're on mute.
So Jill, we've been really savvy actually through the needs assessment process of always plugging the Making Sense resources. We do that right at stage 1 and 2 request. We're unfortunate at the minute because we've lost our nurse assessor, but we're just recruiting her in. But Amy, our previous nurse assessor, would always do a kind of like a mini assessment of need right at stage 1. have a conversation with the family. You should be plugging making sense resources all of the time. And what's absolutely brilliant now, though, is that the Learn Sheffield resources, so that's the resources for teachers and TAs and everybody in education, it's becoming a natural part of their conversation with parents, and we commonly hear within panels. So I'm not having to do as many responses around sensory integration and the request for that. Where we do use the RCOT guidance that came out around challenging the fact that, you know, the provision doesn't have to have a sensory integration trained therapist attached to it. And some of the judges have actually sided on, actually, we're not going to put sensory integration as a word use in the tribunal response. They will just say that it has to be an occupational therapy to deliver. Where we still fall down, though, is where parents are adamant of going down that route of independent provision. They do it late on down the process. So we don't then have time to challenge that. So we do say we have a bit of a strapline saying actually we will provide it for the first 3 to 6 months whilst you are put on the waiting list under Jenny's team, and we expect that to happen, and it will be monitored. So it might not give them the full year, but obviously we do say that actually, you know, where an assessment says that they can still continue to have the sensory support, we will build that in the plan. We do expect them to go on the referral pathway.
But yeah, because that's what you know, we do. We've got some targeted training at the beginning, but it's that bit in between that when they're saying, well, we'll do all that, and I'm not waiting a year for that to be embedded down, but maybe having that conversation then with our team to say you're going to have to give something for 3 to 6 months. Whilst they're on that pathway, whilst they may be waiting, see how that goes and assess it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. So it has definitely reduced it, to answer your question.
Thank you both. Jamie, do we need to pull it to a close?
We've got 5 minutes left to the next session. I will make a note of all of the questions and send them over to you, and who sent them as well. So everyone should get an answer back.
Brilliant.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all for coming.
Thanks very much,
that was
Jenny.
brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.